All right, I thought I'd talk a little bit about, and I did a similar video on this a while ago. What's actually happening here with this pointing thing, or when we talk about this, when there seems to be a resonance or a recognition there that comes seemingly through the language, how that comes about, or what's actually going on. Because one of the big limitations with this is the idea that there is your experience and my experience, um, that there are distinct selves here that have their own discrete reality, their own internal and unique narrative. Whilst in a sense there is truth to that, what I'm always doing here is basically pointing past those boundaries or limitations, and the pointing comes from a description of my own experience, which is without the categorization or label of my experience. It is just experience, or you could say experience describing itself. So as I do this, I appear, so to speak, or that description of experience appears as your experience. So your experience is describing itself to itself. Something about that can have the effect of thinning these boundaries of separation, and producing that resonant quality of recognition or clarity. So something that I think is important to consider or comprehend at some point, and it might not be a mental comprehension, but that all we're ever doing here is describing our own experience, and that we are, because, for example, my experience is the only experience I have access to, or there is only experience. Everything I can say in regards to this non-duality thing is bound to be a description of my experience. This might be tricky for some people. You could even think about this in a logical sense, and you would come to this conclusion, if we're authentic and honest, that anything I can see is a description of my experience. When I talk, automatically there is a duality built into the language. There's an assumption there that isn't within the capacity of language to transcend, as in that's its limit. And the assumption there is that my experience is unique, my experience is distinct. My experience is my experience, which is separate from yours. Yeah, those are all interpretations that are augmented onto experience. Those are all thought interpretations. So in any circumstance, when I speak, when we interact, we're describing our own experience. We're describing experience here. it can be that that's not clear, and we believe we are describing something about an actually existing objective reality that exists independent on its own out with my experience. That my descriptions refer to something real, or even that my descriptions, that I know what your experience is, that I can describe your experience, which isn't possible in that sense. So whenever I speak, I'm either describing my own thought experience, describing the thought experience that is appearing here, whether I know it or not, or pretty much I'm always, in a sense, always describing a thought experience, because now that's only partially true, because in order for me to interpret this sense experience in language, it has to be filtered to an extent through mind. That's not fully true, because that's the reason I'm doing this, because that's not fully true. Like with everything in this, there's a paradox here. That what I'm attempting to do here is to describe something that's not an experience, to point to something that language and mind can't touch, that's beyond its limits, or it is its substance. It becomes before that, so to speak, or is transcendent of that. But we're doing that through the limitation of language, and how that happens with the pointing is that I speak from direct experience, and that has a resonant effect with whoever is listening. The pointing can become much more powerful if this is clear, because if in order for this to be clear, we have to let go of the idea and the belief in actually existing objective reality called enlightenment, or the belief that I can interpret and understand someone else's experience in this way. I can interpret and understand David's experience, and that experience has values and qualities separate from everything else. So the ideal, so to speak, way to listen to this is to let those boundaries flatten out and listen as yourself talking to yourself, as reality describing itself to itself through these apparent separate entities, these apparent individuals. If we can relax into that and open up our experience, by letting go of the concepts, by letting go of the meaning in the words, that they mean something, they point to something real, then this pointing has the potential to be effective, so to speak. In order to speak about non-duality, it's important to come to the understanding that we can't talk about it. It can't be spoken about accurately or directly. In that, we let go of the meaning, the suggested meaning and the importance in the words, and then we can talk about it freely, because we know that what I'm speaking about doesn't point to anything other than your experience, which is simply so right now, in that the words don't actually mean anything, and that we can't define something called non-duality. This is just an indirect tool, in a way. It becomes direct when we open ourselves up to what it's pointing to, what the words are pointing to, so to speak. But if we put great importance in the words, as in they mean something, then we miss that opportunity, in a sense. What I noticed that's very common, and I went through this phase as well, is maybe even after awakening, there will be like or maybe more so after awakening, there will be a I kind of, if you ever heard of the neti approach, there would be kind of like a rejection of the reality of concepts in general and thoughts in general. It's a kind of disassociative thing. Maybe this happens more pre-awakening, so to speak. I'm not quite sure, but there would be like a kind of rejection of the conceptual content of thoughts. So it would be like, that's just a thought, that's not real, or but that's just a thought, or but this is just a concept, or a concept can't define this. And whilst there's truth in that, when we invest importance in that view, we imbue that view with a reality, in that we are taking a position in opposition to the concept or the thought or the language, which again is reifying its reality as something that's important. It's a kind of resistance to concepts, a resistance to language and thought, which is a big limitation. In my experience, there was the identification with this function that I just described, pre-awakening. Post-awakening, the same thing happened, but it was more like a disregarding of certain aspects of experience, a disregarding of the relative through the clear and ongoing experience of limitless awareness or presence, or whatever you'd like to call it. It's the kind of like a form of ignorance that came about through a fixation in the absolute, quite distinct from the form of identification that came, so to speak, pre-awakening. And that I was resisting the thought, I was resisting the concept. I was like, but that's just a concept. That this can't be described. And I was putting the reality into the concepts and the descriptions by resisting them, by labelling them as not real, by pushing them away. But what I was missing was the very substance of that. What I was missing is the neutrality that is available in thought, concept, and language. So there was a very strong signature of resistance there in relation to thought and conceptuality, which reconciles itself with the deepening stages, so to speak, of the more simplistic stages of this awakening process. The thoughts become neutral; they're not important. What imbues them with importance is the position of the subject that is relating to something called thought and concept. The thought and concept becomes an actually existing objective reality that has value and means something. It means not awake or something like that. It means not accurate or something like that, or untrue. So there's a fixation on the non-truth of thought and conceptuality, which again is a limitation. This carried over, in a sense, post-awakening, or after this clarified, in a kind of relaxed aversion to relativity. Like I said, by overly residing somewhere, that somewhere being infinite awareness, or the absolute. So post-awakening, there was a very potent duality there, in that there seemed to be something called infinite awareness, or I amness, or presence, that was somehow distinct from anything else whatsoever. There was a mega concept there that was being mistaken for non-dual nature, so to speak. It was like a very basic and primordial or primary um, felt assumption that then created some sort of overarching background, consistently existing narrative experience called awakeness or enlightenment or whatever. Uh, a totality that unified everything somehow distinct from the things. If anyone's ever been on the Awakening to Reality website, they describe substantialist and insubstantialist non-duality. I think that's how they described it. So substantialist non-duality would be like, in my experience, I could be getting this wrong by their meaning, but the sense of pure existence, presence, I am awareness, unified all manifestation. Manifestation was appearing as that, in that. It was, manifestation was the source of, this was the source of manifestation. The background, the substratum that everything comes from and disappears into, the nothing that seems to consistently exist as the background for the comings and goings of manifestation, something being always here, which you'll never find because it's invisible, it doesn't exist. But that was reified in a way. It's very difficult to explain. Insubstantialist non-duality is all I can really do to describe it is in the absence of that invisible nothing, that formless awareness that unifies everything. That mind, that invisible mind in which all this appears, like the dreamer's mind. The dreamer's mind was reified, somehow subtly distinct from the dream. This has ended up being a massive tangent. What was I talking about in the first place? It makes sense. So in the residing there in that point of view, that viewpoint, which could be anywhere, it's not clear where it is because it doesn't actually exist. There was a duality, a resistance to the relative that didn't go away until that was clearly seen through, or that clarified as not actually there. When that clarifies as not actually there, that the relative, you hear this all the time, becomes the absolute emptiness, becomes form. That we really experience life as being not one, not the other, but on the threshold of, and including both. I can't even describe this because it's so paradoxical, but it's being merely manifestation. Manifestation being the very substance of awareness, experience, presence itself, without anything holding it all together. So that's kind of like the root of where it all comes from, and it manifests itself in identity when that duality becomes powerfully polarized in mind, and we use that relational function to hold on to or resist or reinforce this subjective position that is inherently apart from experience. That subtle viewpoint needs to be here for me to comprehend this, to confirm my awakening, to understand what enlightenment is, Whereas that's what you lose with no self-realisation. It just doesn't need to be there. There doesn't have to be something existing here, experiencing this, comprehending this. It's not even there. It's an interpretation, but it's a powerful one that persists for a good while, even in the deeper stages of this awakening thing. It's impossible to describe. It's impossible to describe. With the initial awakening, you can kind of get close to it. You can point to it quite effectively. With the no self thing, it's like it's just indescribable. It's too simple to describe. It's like experience simplifies itself out of being something that can be understood into its very substance that is just here anyway. It's like something switches off. But in talking from experience right now, which is what I'm always doing, and it's spontaneous, I don't have to plan this because I'm not talking about something with objective qualities that's capable of being captured in concepts. It's entirely free. I can say anything. Language just comes. It just comes spontaneously, such that my deep intuition, my deep feeling is that language doesn't matter. It's completely secondary. What matters is whoever's watching is open, and some part of you knows, at some level, you could say knows, but the language fails. Is it in touch with, and is this which I'm pointing to, which is also me? So it's the sound of the words, it's the appearance. If you're looking at the screen, it's the appearance on the screen. It's the sensation. It's even the thought, which clarifies eventually in the deeper stages of this, that even the thought is, when there's no resistance to thought as something that I need to avoid or has to not be present, which is possible through deep states of meditation or through inquiry or samadhi or whatever it's called. When that subtle idea goes away, even the substance of thought is non-dual. It is not distinct from anything else, any other sense. It's just like one sense. Appearing as nothing to itself. So it also, when this is clear, it becomes really easy to, people become transparent in a sense that because there's no actual existing discrete entity and you're separate, when this clarifies, don't know how to describe this, but the mind becomes transparent. When it's clear that all anyone is ever doing is describing their own experience, be that a thought experience or it referring to a sense experience or something, that's clear. It's clear reality is just describing a thought experience. Why and all of the meaning doesn't mean anything anymore. So that it's like, and it becomes very clear when there is this function of identity and subjectivity there that's potent and when that function is functioning in a strong way, it becomes very clear to notice that, and that's why it can be easy to point, because that's clear and you can point it out, you can pinpoint it, you can zone in on it quite simply because it stands out. It has that signature. When there's and you can see where the resistance and the conditioning is there, where the identification and the protection mechanisms are there. It also makes you much more careful about what you speak about, what you put on display, because everything that you say is a direct insight into your mind. But if there's authenticity there, which is obvious too, when there's authenticity there and there's an authentic movement into this truth, this non-dual truth, describing your own experience knowingly, not unknowingly or inadvertently or whatever, knowingly describing your own experience, knowing that's what's happening here, the experience is describing itself to itself. It opens all of that up. It just blows it all open, and then this can really shine through. The language isn't important, the concepts aren't important, and this can really be free to move how it is, because there are no rules, there aren't any limitations. So I don't know if that was a bit of a tangent. I just wanted to point that out, because it causes a lot of confusion. The confusion manifests as it usually is in, if you're watching this channel, that David here has his own experience, and he's talking about that experience being something specific and distinct that's apart from my experience, the one who's watching. I'm giving you a message that means something, that refers to something objective, and that's not what's happening. That there are, enlightenment is a personal thing or a specific experience, and whilst we can talk about those things, that's not ultimately what I'm talking about. And the belief that there is true and false, there is right and wrong, there is accurate and inaccurate, whilst relatively that might be true, that again assumes the existence of an actually existing objective reality with its own independent qualities apart from the totality of experience that we can talk about and define, which isn't non-duality. So whenever you're engaging in the non-dual space, or you're talking to me or so on, it's good to be clear that everything that you can say, everything that I can say, is merely a description of experience here. It might not always be apparent when that's a thought experience, because you might believe that you're describing something with objective quality, something that actually exists out with your own experience. But it's always a description of what's happening here, and it's usually going to be a thought, right? And when it feels charged, or when it feels important, you can be sure that it's a thought. When it feels like it has meaning importance and gravity. That thought is reinforcing, I suggest, the subjective position, the viewpoint of me, the thing that's relating to, referring to experience. Like I've said a few times before, when you listen to these videos, be aware of where attention is going when these sounds appear in experience. Is it the sound itself? Is it your direct and immediate experience directly right now, or is it moving? Are the concepts contained in these words moving the tension up into a space of mind? It has a distinct feeling tone to it. It has a distinct energetic flavour or quality or signature to it. The contraction of attention in the mind, or is it opening this up? Is there a spaciousness, an emptiness, a freedom? And it can be confusing because it certainly looks like I'm talking about something conceptual, especially if people tune into this and they're not too familiar with the non-duality thing. It certainly looks like there's a guy here talking about something conceptual, something called awakening, but that's not what I'm talking about. On one level it is, but what is transcendent of that? What isn't dependent on those limitations? Anyway, I think that'll have to do for now. Let me know if that makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.